constitutional development in Nigeria, and this is like the second part of constitutional development that we'll be looking at. In our previous videos, we looked at constitutional development in Nigeria in terms of pre-independence constitution. Pre-independence constitution simply means the constitution that we had in Nigeria before our independence on the 1st of October 1960. So we have constitutions like the Clifford's Constitution, Richard's Constitution, Macpherson's Constitution, and Littleton's Constitution. And all these constitutions are what we call the pre-independence constitution. To know more on the pre-independence constitution, please look through our previous videos. But for the course of this class today, we are looking at independence and post-independence constitution in terms of constitutional development in Nigeria. So basically what we'll be looking at in today's class is independence and post-independence constitutions. Some of the objectives that I want us to have in mind as we go through this series of classes is that at the end of this class, I want you to be able to mention the independence constitutions that we have and their features. I also want you to be able to outline the independence and post-independence constitution and also mention their main features. I equally want you to be able to identify the common features in all these constitutions and to also be able to differentiate the factors that are not the same in the constitutions. And I hope that at the end of this class, you are able to achieve all these objectives. Let's dive right into the class. What are the main characteristics of the Independence Constitution of 1960? Before we go too deep, what is the Independence Constitution of 1960? When Nigeria gained independence on October 1st, 1960, we drafted a new constitution. But this new constitution was not a total change from what we had before. And before the Independence Constitution of 1960, we were using the Littleton's Constitution of 1954. So the Independence Constitution was more like a modification to the Littleton's Constitution of 1960. So, having known what the Independence Constitution is, let's go straight into the main characteristics of the Independence Constitution of 1960. The first feature of the Independence Constitution of 1960 is we are operating a parliamentary system of government in Nigeria. So, one of the features of the Independence Constitution is a parliamentary system of government. The Constitution provided for a democratic parliamentary system of government. We also have a federal system. The federal system of government already introduced in Nigeria by the Littleton's Constitution, which was, the federal system of government that operated in Nigeria it started right from the time of Richard's Constitution, but it was not full federalism. It was like just making the way for federalism. So the federal system of government that we already had in Nigeria from the times of Richard's Constitution down to Macpherson's and then Littleton's Constitution was equally maintained in the Independence Constitution of 1960. Head of state. The Governor General was the ceremonial head of state representing the Queen. So while we gained independence in 1960, we would not call what we gained total independence, because at some point we were still depending on Britain. For example, we're operating a parliamentary system of government, but the head of state, that is someone like the president in a parliamentary system of government, was the Governor General, who was a British citizen representing the Queen. The head of state and administration was known as the Prime Minister. We also had something that we called a national parliament in the Independence Constitution of 1960. The Constitution provided for a bicameral legislature at the center, which we call the Senate and the House of Representatives. So at the federal level, that is at the seat of power at the federal level, the Constitution provided for a bicameral legislature. A bicameral legislature means a two-chamber legislature. So the upper chamber legislature and the lower chamber legislature, and they were called the Senate and the House of Representatives. Equally, still under the characteristics of the Independence Constitution, or we can also call it the features of the Independence Constitution of 1960, we have what we call a regional legislature. Each of the three regions had a House of Assembly and the House of Chiefs. So we will remember that during our series of classes on pre-independence constitution, we talked about the fact that it was Richard's Constitution that divided Nigeria into regions. And the division of Nigeria into regions was done by Richard's constitution, but it was like the person that really based the ground for the division of Nigeria into region was Sir Baudelaire. So, but it was during the time of Richard's constitution that it was finalized. So, each of the three regions that we had in Nigeria as at that time, which are namely the Western region, the Eastern region, and the Northern region, were still maintained under the Independence Constitution of 1960. And each of those three regions had a House of Assembly and a House of Chief. So this means that equally under the regions, each regions were operating a bicameral legislature, a two-chamber legislature. One had the House of, one called the House of Assembly, the other called the House of Chiefs. Another characteristic of the Independence Constitution of 1960 is a regional head of state. A regional head of state. The 1960 Constitution provided for a premier as the head of state, as the head of the executive for each of the regions. Also, provisions were made for a ceremonial governor for the region. So, even at the regional levels, we're operating what we call like something similar to what we have in a parliamentary system of government. So we had the head of state and we had the head of government. So the 1960 Constitution, which is also called the Independence Constitution, provided for a premier as the head of the executive for each of the regions, and also provisions were made for a ceremonial governor for each of the regions. So the premier is someone like the prime minister in a parliamentary system of government. So under each regions, they had a head of government and a ceremonial governor. Still under the characteristics of the Independence Constitution of 1960, we have the fundamental human rights of the citizens were entrenched in the Constitution. So the Independence Constitution of 1960 entrenched the fundamental human rights of citizens. We also have the Privy Court. The final court of appeal was the Privy Court in London. And this is one of the reasons why I said, although we can say Nigeria gained independence in 1960, we cannot see that independence as a total independence. It is more of we cannot call it a total independence, because although Nigeria was independent, the final court of appeal was not the Supreme Court in Nigeria, it was the Privy Court in London, the Privy Council in London. We also have citizenship. The Constitution defined who a citizen was and how to acquire citizenship. So the Independence Constitution of 1960 defined who a citizen was and the steps to acquire citizenship of Nigeria, probably by birth. If you do something that honors the country, we can call you an honorary citizen of Nigeria. By marriage, by naturalization. So the Constitution, the Independence Constitution of 1960, defined who a citizen was, who, before you can be called a citizen of Nigeria, what are the qualities, characteristics that you must have, and also the steps to acquire the citizenship of Nigeria. Equally, there was also the procedure for amendment. The procedure for amendment was also one of the characteristics of the Independence Constitution of 1960. The Constitution contained the procedure for amendment. What are the steps we need to go through if we have to change any of the things that are entrenched in this Constitution? And the Constitution was, of course, rigid. And rigid Constitution has a longer period for amendment and has rigorous processes that has to be taken before a Constitution can be amended. So, another characteristic of the Independence Constitution of 1960 is the Constitution contained the procedure that we need to take, that are meant to be taken before anything on the Constitution can be amended. Another characteristic of the Independence Constitution of 1960 is the creation of regions. The creation of regions. The Independence Constitution laid down the procedure for creating new regions. The Midwestern region was equally created in 1963. State of emergency. The federal government was given the power to declare a state of emergency in any part of the country if there were crisis or war. However, a resolution will be passed by the House of Representatives with a two-thirds majority supporting it. So, although the federal government was given the power to declare a state of emergency in any part of the country, two-thirds majority has to support it. Two-thirds majority of the House of Representatives has to support it before before a state of emergency can be declared. Division of power. The next point we'll be looking at is division of power, and we are still talking about the main characteristics of the Independence Constitution of 1960. The Constitution divided the legislative power of government into three. We have the exclusive, the concurrent, and the residual list. For example, only the central government could make laws through the parliament on issues listed under the executive list. So every issue that is listed under the executive list are issues that only the federal government has the power to legislate on. So whatever is listed under the exclusive list, that means that only the federal government has the power to legislate, to make law, to control these issues. And some of those issues are currency. Our currency in Nigeria is controlled by the federal government. The state government has no power, and they have no hand, and they have no authority in terms of the currency of the country. Our power, the power is the defense of the country is controlled by the federal government. Only the federal government has the ability to move the army. The state government cannot move any army. Only the federal government has the power to move the army. Equally, we have issues such as external affairs. We have issues such as things that affect inter-country issues. There are issues that only the federal government can legislate on. The state government has no business, they have no power, they have no authority to legislate on issues under the concurrent list. So we're saying that the powers of government are divided into three. The legislative powers of government are divided into three. We said the exclusive are issues. Under the exclusive list, we have issues that only the federal government can legislate on. So what do we have under the concurrent list? Under the concurrent list, we have issues that not only the federal government can legislate on, but equally the state governments, the regional governments can also legislate on issues in the concurrent list. To round it up, for ease of understanding, this simply means that under the concurrent list, both the federal government and the state government, they can both legislate under the concurrent list. And so we have issues that are also listed under the concurrent list, and there are issues whereby the state government and the federal government can equally legislate under them. We also have issues under the residual list. What are issues under the residual list? Issues under the residual list are issues that only the regional governments can legislate on. So no matter how mighty and powerful and how much authority the federal government has, they cannot legislate under issues in the residual list. These are issues that only the regional governments are given the power to legislate on. So another characteristics of the Independence Constitution of 1960 is the division of governmental power. So the Constitution divided the legislative powers of the government into three. Exclusive, only the federal government can legislate on these issues. Concurrent, both the federal government and the state government can legislate on these issues. And we equally have the residual, which is issues that only the residual government, can legislate on. Still under the characteristics, we have revenue allocation. The basis for revenue allocation was stated in the Independence Constitution of 1960. How do we divide or share the nation's resources among the regions and the federal government? So how the federal government's allocation, how the federal government's revenue is shared among the regions and the states and the federal government was also stated in the Constitution. Appointment of judges. Judges of the Supreme and High Courts were appointed on the advice of the Judicial Service Commission, consisting of judges. So, judges of the Supreme and High Court, they were appointed by the President, but they were appointed on the advice of a Judicial Service Commission. And Judicial Service Commission consists of judges. So, the members of the Judicial Service Commission brings forth a person as a candidate that is suitable for being a judge at the Supreme Court or the High Court. And the President then approves that, okay, this person can be appointed as a judge or cannot be appointed as a judge. But usually the president is the one that appoints judges, but he appoints them based on the advice of the Judicial Service Commission. Another characteristic of the Independence Constitution of 1960 is judicial review. The Independence Constitution of 1960 granted the Federal Court, Supreme Court, the power of judicial review. The power of the Supreme Court the Supreme Court has the power to question some of the activities of other arms or organs of government which are regarded as unconstitutional. So another characteristics of the Independence Constitution of 1960 is they had the power of the judiciary had the power of judicial review. That is, the Federal Supreme Court, they had the power of judicial review. The powers of the Supreme Court could question some of the activities of other arms of government that were regarded as unconstitutional.